Yes, and now after thinking this API as a product, these two talks, I will invite fellow colleagues, Ronnie and Mike. Right? Hello, Mike. Hello, Ronnie. How are you?
Hey there.
Hello, Mehdi.
Hello. So unfortunately, Erik is not able to join for, let's consider health reasons. But he says hi to the community, right? He was at apidays Helsinki a few weeks ago and in New York, but unfortunately he can't be there today. We hope him great. What do you say that in English? Sorry.
Recovering.
Yeah. Great recovering. So, Ronnie and Mike, we are fellow co-authors of the book Continuous API Management, right? We've been part of the API Academy together, but can you just, before we start, can you make a quick, what are you currently doing today?
Okay, well, I'll go. So I'm currently working with a couple of customers on helping them build out their products and platforms strategy. Some very interesting projects I hope to be able to share pretty soon. And I continue to travel just a little bit. I was in Europe a couple of months ago. I'll be at San Francisco for IETF next month. And I continue writing. So there are a couple of different projects brewing. Hopefully by the end of the year, we'll have some more material out there. Another book, I think.
Another book, right? Perfect.
All right. On my side, I'm at a consultancy called Publicis, Sapient. I still do a little bit of API work, but just like API has gotten broad, I'm involved in all kinds of things: banking as a service, embedded finance, core lists or core banking modernization, all the ways we use APIs, right? So I do a lot of that work, and I don't get to travel as much as I used to, so that's too bad.
Yeah, next conference is in London, so you don't have to travel too much, right? No, that's good. So I will ask on the back end to put the slides I put on the backstage if you can. But yeah, in the book Continuous API Management, we talk about a lot of things about continuously manage your APIs. But let's say yesterday at the event we talk about especially API management in the context of new technologies like LLMs and others. But I think we are the best team here to maybe get the basics on a perfect definition. So, and I really like, not because I'm part of the book authors, but I really like how we define, API management, right? And how it is to managing API. So I would love we start by trying to define API management, if that's.
Well,
Mike,
I think.
Ahead, yeah.
No, I think Mehdi, you should start with that one, and then we'll take it from there. You give us your story.
No. For me, managing APIs and actually continuously managing APIs is all the practice enabling to understand, produce, and secure, and make them evolve, and make the APIs evolve. Right? It's all of this. And that's actually what we define in the 10 pillars of API management, which are, if I go by memory, which is strategy, design, documentation, development, testing, deployment, security, monitoring, promotion, discovery, and versioning. So that's really the 10 pillars we define in the book. And so it's all the practice that really represent that.
Yeah, and I would add to that. That's impressive. I don't think I could have done that 10-step. That's excellent. I would also add to that. I think one of the other things we talk about in the book a lot is the platform, the landscape, as Erik often calls it, right? So it isn't just managing one API, but it's managing lots of APIs. And you have enough APIs. There's always some API that's in some version or some transition or some test case. So it's a heterogeneous ecosystem that you manage as well. And I think people are realizing more and more that's where the platform aspect to it comes in as well. So those pillars of an API, as well as all of the factors that go into managing the landscape, are really, really important.
And actually, I love when we were brainstorming about the book. I think there was a sentence we tried to coin. I think I was pushing for it, but it was like from zero to few to many APIs, right? And so you have different maturity models. You have different, let's say, scalability practice. Managing really few. The first ones you will really craft and you will really nurture into your the top practice, thinking of them as products, right? But then the landscaping idea of Erik would be like, okay, with few of them it's fine, but with thousands of them, like we need to scale all of this. We need to scale testing, deployment, development. We need to scale design. So that's really this idea. And yes, and Ronnie, you were mostly talking about the maturity part, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we wrote that book twice, right? When did we write it first? Does anyone remember? That was
12, 13, 15.
Right. So where was the industry? Industry was APIs were understood as valuable, and people were still struggling with, okay, how do I use them? Then we did a second edition after microservices have exploded, right? And now we're talking about it a few years later. I think absolutely maturity is part of it. If we just key on the management part, right? Management's pretty simple. Management is, we've got assets or resources. How do we make them cost efficient? And how do we make them drive value, right? And if you're managing people, there'd be a way to do that. I think a lot of what we describe here is very similar to how you manage people. I think the magic is, okay, how do you apply that to this thing called an API? And just like you talked about scale, Mehdi, if you're managing 5 people versus 5,000, that's fundamentally different. And from a maturity perspective, I think it's the same. If you're managing a junior group versus a seasoned group of people, that's also fundamentally different, right? And it's true with APIs. And I know we'll get to this in the discussion, but we are on the verge of another one of those big changes that's fundamentally going to change the cost and value of what we're managing. But, I think we all know what that is. We'll talk about that later, I hope.
Yeah, and actually, do you consider like we have a sentence in the book, like, on the API maturity life cycle, which is the right investment for the right phase. Also, there's this number aspect, this number dimension, but these is also, we have this idea of different phase, from the before it's published, after it's published, when its value is realized, when it goes to maintenance and retirement, right? So we have also this, there's really multiple dimensions. So the number that you want to create, how important they are in your system, how old they are, or how, let's say, aligned with their true value. So it seems quite difficult for any manager to have all these degrees of understanding, don't you think?
Absolutely, yes. It's hard. It's hard work. Yes, the short answer.
Yeah, no, and so for me, I really think that actually the goal is to catch up the maximum of certitudes in this uncertain practice, that has too many degrees of liberty. And so, yeah, we hope the book helped at least catch a few of them, right? So now we started about the really more about the book, what's in the book, what API management, the 10 pillars, the maturity phase, and stuff like that. Yesterday, we opened the conference with Erik Newcomer, former CTO of WSO2 and now author at the New Stack and the editor at the New Stack, actually. We talk about the latest trends. And so one of the first trends we talk about is really the commoditization of API management, actually, of the API gateway. So I will just ask you a question, like, is the gateway, 10 years ago, the gateway was something, right? The gateway was the center of discussion. Now it's over. The gateway is just it's like the keyboard on a computer. It's obvious it's there, right?
Well, Ronnie, you talked about that many years ago, didn't you? And kind of upset a few people along the way.
Well, firstly, the keyboard's important, right? Like, I need a keyboard. I need an API gateway too. Commoditization doesn't mean that something doesn't have value. It just means that there's less of a differentiation between products, right? So it's easy to replace one with the other. Now, I'll say, having worked with lots of clients and they go through the phases of picking different vendors, right? There's obviously differences. I think it's not commoditized to the point that the company behind the gateway product doesn't matter anymore, right? It's still a partnership, a relationship, right? You pick a product based on the team that will take you there. The other thing that's happened is, while HTTP get put post delete got commoditized, What we didn't know was that people would just keep adding different ways to do APIs, right? Like, so you'd get GraphQL, and then you get event-based, and then other asynchronous flavors. So there's still room for catching up, staying ahead, and differentiating your product. I don't know, Mike, what are you seeing on your side?
Well, no, I think that's exactly right. So, to leap ahead, commoditization is just one of the steps in the process. If you think about this, and I agree with you 100%, commoditization is not a negative term. It's a state, it's a plan. A lot of this has to do with what do you have to do unique for you? What can you purchase on the market so you don't have to do it uniquely? What is so commoditized that everybody has the same thing you do? So a lot of times what commoditized means is everybody's operating on the same rules. There's no clear advantage if you're in the commoditized space. So this has a lot to do not just with managing your APIs, but also the products you offer to others. Where are your products in this mix? Are your products fighting in the commoditized space? Have you got a healthy offering in the marketplace that's not commoditized? Or is your product so unique that nobody else can do it? That changes all sorts of other strategies about how you would design and build and maintain your product as an API for an ecosystem. So the trend of commoditization is just one step in the trend of moving in Wardley maps from left to right, or some kind of circle when we talk about our circle of cycling. So that's just one step on the on the journey, and it's important to keep the other steps in mind at all times. What's commoditized now? What's going to get commoditized later? All those kinds of things I think are important as well in this idea of managing your APIs.
So yeah, and in the state of the API industry, I take 3 examples. The first one is all the acquisition of, let's say, API management companies that have been in the past. Broadcom acquiring CA, who had acquired Layer 7, who had acquired RunScope, all this stuff, or MuleSoft acquired by Salesforce, and Apigee acquired by Google. All this first. All the vendors acquire the solution, to show that it should be a de facto product, right? So that's the thing. The second thing is the explosion of open source. So WSO2 was a pioneer with open source API management solution, but over the last 6-7 years, like Kong went open source, Gravity, Tyke, and plenty other. 3Scale was also open source, acquired by Red Hat, acquired by IBM too. So it's really about all of this really represent kind of a lot of commoditization. And even I've just seen recently a company called Zuplo. I don't know if you've heard about them, but they do like API gateway as code, right? It's a text file. I don't remember if it's YAML or whatever, but it's a specification for gateway. It's a text file, and your developer can just type what they want in the gateway and push it in production. It's like an OpenAPI definition, but just for the gateway functionalities, like infrastructure as code for Amazon. So it's really, it has shift left also really, really hard.
Yeah, that's actually very fascinating.
Probably what stopped it from being truly commoditized is we never got to the point where I could take all of the investment I made in product A, all those rules, all the configuration, and just drop it into product B, right? Let's be honest, because there's so much stickiness with these things, right? They're all kind of bespoke, which is preventing true commoditization. But the last note on the topic is, I know the companies you mentioned, I think everyone kind of read the writing that the gateway part is getting commoditized. But a lot of those companies described, their value is not the gateway, right? It's the admin, right. It's the Kubernetes, it's the scaling, it's the other parts, right? So they kind of moved away from 10 years ago when we were talking about it. It was about, not introducing message latency and performing security. Well, that is not going to get you into any room anymore, right? That's the basic expectation. So it's harder to find is the delighters or the utility functions that really get you, ahead of your competitors.
So you talk about security and latency, and actually that's 2 of the trends we talked with yesterday. I will start maybe by the latency aspect. The real-time demand, I don't know if it's really it has been from the tech side or the business side, and actually I would love your opinion on that, but really revive this event-driven architecture. We talk about messaging since in the software industry for a really long time. It was just out of fashion. But yeah, it seems it's back. And why it has been so let's say back so hardly? Is it because of the async API? Is it because of business demands? Or to your mind, why event-driven architecture is so hyped these days?
Yeah, so actually, Ronnie and I are just finishing up a report on this space, and I think one of the things that I've noticed, and Ronnie can comment on this as well, is the technology has changed enough that the barrier of entry for event-driven architecture of various kinds, whether it's IoT-driven or just commerce or business-driven, the barrier of entry is low enough that we can do this more and more. Now, you could think about that as moving from that sort of unique category to the product category. There's a lot of market options. There are a lot of platforms that really cater to this kind of event-driven or asynchronous, or to think about it even more directly, really shortening the distance between when the event happens and when the message appears in some data store. So I think it's just easier. That means people are thinking more creatively. There are more demands. More mobile devices means I expect to hear right away anyway. So I think a lot of that is just driven by technology. You know how there's sort of this pattern where technology gets ahead of conceptual thinking in products, and then products move and get ahead of technology. I think we're just in that phase where those products can really grow a lot more. I don't know, Ronnie, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right. I see two primary drivers on the business side. There's absolutely rising customer expectations, and that's not just in the mass market. I mean, for a large corporate dealing with a big bank, up until a few years ago, you might have been okay with it's a file-based thing. But now, because you use so much stuff on your phone, why can't I just do something and it happens, right? So there's this huge pressure for real time, which if you don't have the tech, is hard. And then the other big driver on the tech side, for the last few years, we've been saying, let's break all the monoliths up into small things. And then people started doing that. They said, okay, when you break it up, each of those things should have their own little pieces of data. So everyone started doing that. But then to synchronize all that data, you suddenly need this whole world of asynchronous, event-driven, right? That's the only way to really make it work, it turns out. So that just created added pressure to jump into this world, right? So everything needs to be capable of streaming, of being real time, of being almost instant.
So Mike, it seems like the software industry repeats itself. New technologies enable old models to be more performant. So we go back to these models, and these models become mainstream. So new technologies will get new older models, to be more performant, and we will go back. So because it seems like monolith, microservice, or synchronous, asynchronous. Over the last 40 years of software, it seems it's what's happening. So that's really interesting at some point. But also, I will just share you it's not a joke actually. It's real. But I talked to a chief architect at a really important social network. Cannot name it directly, but we had this discussion about what is real time, and he asked me the question how fast is real time for you for a request? So I said, okay, I don't know, 10 milliseconds. He said, no, too late. I said, 1 millisecond. I said, 1 millisecond. He said, no. He said, okay, 100 microseconds. And actually, Nginx used to make demos where they were showing microseconds requests, right? So on their really lightweight API management proxy, and say, no. Say, what? 1 microsecond? He said, less than that. I say, now, come on, 0? And he told me less than that. I say, what? It's crazy. No, actually, because they were telling me the business demand of real time and let's say the constraint on user experience, say, actually they provision all the potential next actions in the app to be below 0. So he told me, of course, it doesn't make sense physically, but in terms of user experience, he say, we provision the next actions in cache in the app to actually be below 0. When he clicks, it's already there. It's local. It doesn't go through the network. So it's just to show an example of how the business demand is pushing on this real time that I was not expecting.
Yeah, and I would just add to that that what the business demand has done is change the rules on design and implementation of the application itself. And it's creating a way to start using that predictability, using your behavior, using past information to start thinking ahead of what you do. And that is sort of almost sort of the negative cache, right? Is the idea that I'm going to send the possibilities to you first. And of course, I've been talking about sending possibilities and messages for 20 years. There are lots of reasons why we might start to pay attention to what somebody might want to do next. And again, technology is making this easier than it's ever been, easier and cheaper to do. And that's why I think we're seeing more of it.
So Ronnie, does it make sense to be below zero on a request?
It does. And I believe I've heard Mike talk about that like years ago, right? And even from an HTTP perspective, that, you know, this is the whole point of things like GET, because you can pre-cache and you can be optimistic about what someone might do and it's not going to change. So, you know, Roy Fielding, all of those guys. I mean, this is not something no one had done. What it takes is for people to apply it. And there's just never enough of that, right? Like, so a smart person who sees the potential of a feature like that and actually implements it, I mean, that's the magic.
Yeah, Mike told everything that would happen 10 years ago.
Yeah, I'm still waiting.
Yeah, just waiting, right? Just
That's
waiting.
all, just waiting.
So yes, and one of the other trends that may be a little more complex, we don't tackle that too much, at least in the book, which is the security, the compliance, you know, all these post-COVID, like, you know, endpoints that were like out in the wild, these shadow APIs that have been open like really fast, just to be because it was the mess because of the COVID-19 digitalization. And so yeah, so it's companies are like, we've seen many tools appearing, many companies, you know, providing API security, claiming the classic API management solution were not good enough with these new threats. So do you also see that in the company you consult with?
You know, I think the statement, look, security will never be good enough. I mean, that is a never-ending war, right? So, which is why it's a wonderful place to sell software into, because there's always something you can do better. I do think we're reaching a point where large organizations are wanting, you know, we haven't revisited our security stack in a while on the API side. And now with some of the tech changes, you're starting to see, okay, maybe there's opportunities. Usually I'm seeing interest in one of two areas. Can you do something at the macro level? So rather than message security, traffic security, right? So we see a few vendors there, like looking at patterns, trying to detect and diagnose. And then the second area is around just like lowering cost of doing security in the first place. Can you shift it left? Can you make it faster? Can you make it smoother, easier, right? But I do think it's a little bit different from like early days where, you know, there was OAuth 1 and OAuth 2, and man, that was a big change, right? I think we're at a point where it's pretty stable. Security is pretty decent. As soon as I say that, someone will pull out 10 examples, right? But, you know, just as a general rule, pretty decent. It's you know, we've got good standards and we've got a good way of connecting. It's the extra stuff, I think, where there's opportunity.
Yeah, I would add a couple of things to that. I think one of the things that's happening is just as we were talking before about negative caching or zero, you know, under zero caching. I think understanding the possibilities gives us a different security matrix. If I know that it's likely that the next step that you are going to do on your mobile app is one of these 5 things, and you do number 6 or 7 on the list, I can be curious about that. I can actually start to say, well, my prediction was off. Why is that? If we want to design systems that are actually really good at security, we have to start designing systems that are really good at predicting and understanding what's going on. And we've got some opportunities to do that. You know, there's a famous Michael Nygaard quote, which is, you can't eliminate bugs, you can only survive them. And I think the same thing applies to security breaches as well. We have different kinds of security breaches, right? We have cases where people design things poorly, but then we also have cases where somebody breaks in, where somebody does a robbery. And we've had, you know, robberies of banks and all sorts of things for centuries. but we try to figure out how to make them as inconsequential as we can and non-destructive as we can. So I think that we're going to see a lot more in that area as well. The financial industry has all sorts of ways of surviving credit card fraud, for example. We need to do more of that kind of surviving, I think, in your IT space as well. So just as Ronnie was talking about traffic versus maybe individual transactions or applications, I think also we need to start thinking about the difference between a particular activity or some particular design versus the way we build the infrastructure itself. Maybe you've got to be insured to be participating. Maybe you have to have certain things in place before you're certified to be able to move money around. There are lots of other things that we can do to create more security and make it more survivable, lower the consequence as well as lower the rate of occurrence. But
so it depends what we mean by security. Like Mehdi, you have been actively over the last few years diving into things like privacy, right? Data. Do you consider that part of security? I mean, you can tell us about that.
Yeah, I consider, for me, security is being sure that what you want to keep secret and for yourself, stay secret and for yourself, and what you allow others to open, what you open for others is always at the right level, right? Always at the right level and the right authorization. So, and of course, privacy regulations, all the things that actually needs to have control and limitation, for me, they're part of security. They're part of security. Security is not just like, is the secret breach or not? There are different flavors. There are many shades of security. But the goal is to be sure that actually what's shared, only what needs to be shared and with the right person. So for me, that's security. It's not only the internal aspect or whatever. It's also open in the wild. So of course, privacy regulations, when you are not allowed to share data to a specific country or for a specific usage, which is really new, like GDPR, CCPA in California, COLOPIA in Colorado, and many other regulations. Actually, 60, for example, allow you to check for the purpose of the call, the API call, for example. So the same API can call the same data, the same data, the same resource for the same, for example, end application like a CRM. But if it's for marketing purposes, because you have the consent of the user, you can do it. If it's for commercial purposes, you don't have the consent, you should not be able to do it. So that leads to a term that is really new, which is purpose-based access management, which now you will need to understand it's not just the app, the scope, the authorization, the right database, the right access, the read access. It's not just like an architectural point of view. It's really the end use point of view, the marketing point of view, or the business point of view that needs to be in the business, in the logic. And companies are not able to do that. At least some have tried, and I've been a witness to see that they were not able to do it.
Yeah, and that what you described about the way people behave in certain contexts is the way we've run businesses face to face for centuries, right? I'm sorry, I can't give you that information because you're blah, or you're going to use it for this purpose or that. So figuring how to bring all of that success and all of that learning and intellectual property into the IT world is definitely going to be a challenge. But like Ronnie says, security is an evergreen space. I'm sure there's lots of opportunity out there for that.
Yeah, but if an application has an access to a specific scope to that data, for an architect, for a developer, fine, that works. I can do the request a second time and a third time and a fourth time. And actually, no, because now you have to check the country where it's the user, the consent, if it's still active or not, if it retrieved consent. So it's not a physical access anymore. It's not a physical access. Now you have a legal access.
That's exactly right.
So that's really, really complex.
Yep.
So now we talk about the business being involved, business decisions. There is also a fourth trend we talked about, which is the no-code trend. How we can build APIs to feed no-code tools or no-code integration inside our organization, where actually business owners or business managers can actually code without doing shadow IT. They actually build a business application in the realm of IT, right? So is it something you've also seen, the no-code era and how to build APIs for the no-code tooling?
Go ahead, Ronnie.
So the question was, specific to, I just want to make sure, specific to how do you build APIs to be compatible with no-code, low-code?
Let's say is no-code a strategy, or at least a question that maybe the company you work with actually, when they build APIs, they think, okay, we need to be sure we integrate to the no-code tools we use internally, because we don't have enough developers, and business people wants to have the ability to build apps on them.
So the reason I was clarifying the question, because it was interesting to me, because I've not seen that at all. So I've not seen an API team purposefully design APIs so that they're compatible with no-code, low-code. I've usually seen the opposite, right? So the people who implement the no-code, low-code stuff have to make sure that it can use all the APIs in the estate, right? It's an interesting idea, but I don't know if I would recommend it that way personally. I don't know, Mike, if you've seen that.
Well, I can think of a current engagement that I'm working on right now, where there's it's a global organization, and there are parts of the organization that have lots and lots of IT resources, and other parts of the organization that have very, very few IT resources. And there needs to be some global level governance and design and consistency across the entire operation. That means some people are doing whatever amounts to no code, for the no being a variable. So some organizations, they have lots of effort that they can put into it, some they can't. That's one of the places where no code makes a lot of sense, where it's not something where I'm not as smart as everyone else. I'm not a coder. I don't have a set of resources available to me. I don't have an IT shop. I'm a small organization, a small company, or a small vendor, or a small provider. So designing systems where that works for varying levels of participation, I think, is really important. What I saw early on was this idea of no code mimicking, sort of automating what humans would do if they were coding. So that's code generation, or reading things live, and then coming up with some stub or some other solution, whether it's runtime or design time. What I'm seeing more and more are people saying, well, for this audience, we need this kind of interface. For this audience, we need that kind of interface. And in that sense, I've got some experience where I'm seeing organizations designing specifically to make their product available for people who you might call citizen developers.
Actually, I agree with you, Ronnie. The first move I've seen is like, okay, you are doing shadow IT on your own.
Are you scoring it? Because then I get a point. Is that right?
Yeah, you get 1 point. 1 point for Ronnie, right?
Just one.
At least one, right? No, really having this no code, like in IT, say, okay, you want to use Airtable, you want to use Notion, you want to use Make, you want to use Zapier. It has to be in the realm of security and on how we govern stuff. So now, and all these no code tools actually begins to have the enterprise versions at some point, where things can be better governed. For example, I've seen, I cannot name the company, but some business managers who were not knowing what is a scope, so they were putting just scope all to all apps connecting to the Airtable database they were doing, because it needs a culture, right? It needs a culture, an IT culture, to understand how it works. But then the API teams have been mandated to make plugins to Notion, to Airtable, to Zapier with internal APIs for business people to be able to use them. So it's really these both sides. But first is, as you say, Ronnie, security, governance, has to be accepted, and then we mix our APIs into that. And so actually that leads to the latest trend, which is where everything can be said, which is the LLM trend, right? The ChatGPT and all the different LLMs. And my question is, today, and it's so hot that actually you can say anything, right? It will be obsolete in a few weeks. But what advice you would give to a company who try to get into that game with their own APIs, like consuming these APIs and maybe mixing their APIs with these LLMs, to make plugins, to be sure, what on API management level, what would be the advice you could give, if you can give any?
I'll just start with some of the basics. I've had some discussions with a handful of people over the last year. And the first thing I tell people is, you know what, this is not new. This is just an extension, right? So whether it's code completion for developers, or whether it's using templates, or whether it's using code generators, now we're just to the point where we're getting a sort of a shorter distance between what I want and what I see, right? Because LLMs are generating code, they're generating OpenAPI specs and so on and so forth. We've had generators before. The other thing that I would say is, I would think of large language models very similar to fully self-driving cars, right? Do you want to get in a fully self-driving car and go to sleep and then have it take you to where you're going to go? Well, that's exactly the way I think about LLMs as well. Do you want to just go ahead and tell it, okay, give me this, and then go to sleep, and then take whatever they offer and then put that in production? Of course, we don't. So all we're really doing is trying to figure out, what can we automate? What drudgery can we take out safely and still get quality materials? So I think, sure, there's lots of opportunity. I'm really, really impressed with the way OpenAI has kind of given us all a dopamine fix for large language models. We want to interact. We want to sort of predict about what it's going to do and say. And we ask it all sorts of questions, and in the process, give them all sorts of personal data. I think it's a brilliant scheme. But we've had large language models for over 10 years, and we'll have other models as well. Treat this just like you treat anything else. It's a step along the way. Right now, I think there's way too many foot guns for me to use this in any serious production way, but I am doing lots of experimenting.
Mike, I'm going to disagree with you here. It doesn't feel like an incremental step. This feels different. This feels era defining. Firstly, because of the pace at which, yes, we had AI ML. There was BERT, and then LLMs. And the stuff's. I think in our community we were playing with GitHub Copilot before, the CEOs learned about ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
But the thing is, they did learn about it, and almost overnight, everything had to talk about AI, right? Almost overnight, we all had to start considering it. And it certainly feels like, with all the resources that are going into it, and the speed at which I'm seeing not just talk, but implementation, just about every client I have, they have like whole teams who are implementing. We've got large banks who are creating enterprise grade shared AI services with like, how do we do data management? I really do think within 5 to 10 years, we might see that, of course, APIs will be there, but they just may not be, it may not be as important to have good APIs, right? So we could be at the beginning of the decline of what we think about as API design, right? Because when the cost of integration gets low enough,
right,
the value of really easy to use, easy to change APIs fundamentally goes down.
Yeah, I would say on that last step, we may find that the cost and effort needed to get usable APIs that solve a problem may be drastically lower, right? It doesn't mean they're well designed. It doesn't mean they're poorly designed. It means whether or not they work. And there's a high effort for a lot of them today. So AI models of various types could very much lower the bar quite a bit. And I think that's good.
It reminds me, Zdenek, Nemec, who was pushing for the 6-7 years the word autonomous APIs. When finally software will finally be able to integrate other software without interaction of humans. And now he's doing this superface edit AI, right? So that reminds me this idea. But on API management level, it may have some issues. Like, for example, if your users prefer the LLM interface to interact with you, with your API or your data versus the direct, your direct portal. So the LLM will be kind of a backend where they will have to give their API key, whatever, right? There is also for example, the temperature. Maybe for people who are not familiar with temperature is like it's a number between 0 to 1, where you allow the generation of text or image to go to be imaginative, right? So if you're at 0, it's just facts. There is no generation of text. If you go more to 1, it generates, it can actually make up stuff, it can really be creative, right? And so I've seen companies who are asking me like, do you know a gateway where actually we can put in a policy, I don't want to be used by an LLM with a temperature more than 0.2 or more than 0.5. I don't want my data to be used in a more generative way because for example, I'm a law firm and I want to be sure that what I say is not changed, right? So I think there's a new pattern, a new model about how my data can be reused, and API will be at the front of it.
Yeah, I think
go ahead.
The value of data is fundamentally changed. So like here's the thing that shifts. So right now, what we focus on is the channel and the interface, right? And in the future, you might just see a shift to focusing on the data itself. And then the last part of the shift is even what your channel looks like, right? Today, we talk about things like embedding into someone's app or site. And then tomorrow, maybe it's just about plugging into the 3 most popular chatbots in the world, like full stop.
Yeah, I think the other thing that, as if we sort of step back and we think about the notion of API management in general and platforms and products, we've talked about a handful of topics already, things like security and maturity modeling and life cycling, all of which gnarly problems can be improved by throwing AI at the problem, predicting one's behavior, understanding when you're sort of out of scope from what you normally do, making decisions for you about what the next likely decision you're going to make is in order to improve the responsiveness of the app. All those things can be handled with LLM type technologies or other ones that we would see later. So it isn't just AI as the end, but it's AI as the means to solve all problems on all the spectrum, from the initial design through the implementation, the testing, the penetration, the security, the privacy evaluation, all through the life cycle as well. So I think as long as we think of these as tools and opportunities rather than simply as ends themselves, I think we're going to find tons and tons of great ways to apply this kind of technology. And, in very many ways, you'd said this earlier, Mehdi, throughout all the decades, the technology changes, but the problems are pretty much the same. How do we do this efficiently, effectively, safely, at scale, and all those other things that we sort of think of as non-functional elements? And AI in general can help us with a lot of that, I think.
Someone made a statement about, like, should we go into the LLMs? Should we make plugins? He said that, 25 years ago, 20 years ago, if you were not allowing Google to crawl your website with robot.txt, but, you were not existing in the results. So you were not existing,
Yep.
Yeah. And so, because when Google has been leader, you had to be on Google, you had search engine optimization. With LLMs having hundreds of millions of users, if you're not in the results, right? If you don't exist in the results, you may not exist. And especially because they don't give the source, at least yet. So you want to be the one when you ask for a flight, ask for a hotel, what's the best book author on this topic. You want to be sure it's your books that goes there. You want to be sure it's your hotels, right? You want to exist. You want to be discovered. And so this is why some companies say, okay, I don't care about copyright. I want to exist to these 100 or 200 million users that are actually asking questions, and I'm the answer. But if I don't connect the source of truth, I will never exist. So that's, some businesses are really afraid to miss and to not exist in this text interface.
Well, let me just say that's a whole nother business, and that is making sure you exist. And that's remote tasking, right? That's hiring all sorts of people to mark up content to make sure that content is consumable and available. And that's a whole nother world of mechanical turking that's going on behind the scenes that we're not talking a lot about. And you're exactly right. People want to make sure they're in the data stream. That's a different story than using the data stream, right? So that's a really, really good point. So I'm sorry, Ronnie, I interrupted you.
I think along the same lines, but if I think about this community, it's really built on, hey, can the web be open? Can data be interchanged? How do we make things more open? I mean, going back to HTTP, www, whereas the AI thing starts to feel like there's no value in being open. and there's maybe a shift to being closed, and it's more like what Mike is describing. So amongst a set of closed systems, how do I embed my messaging and sell my stuff into those closed systems? Because if I just let you use my data, you monetize it and I'm left out, right? And we've seen a couple of very high profile cases of, companies shutting down APIs, shutting down things faster than before because they're getting monetized, right? Without getting a share
by somebody else. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and we hope we have some time to answer if it doesn't go too fast. For the last 2 minutes we have, I will just ask you now LLM for API management. Did you see like some API definitions, created by LLMs, or did you see some API documentation created by LLMs? And if you've seen any, what do you think about them?
I'll just say quickly, I have seen some examples of OpenAPI and protobuf and human readable documentation, and none of them were good enough to put in production. In other words, they're good starter material, but they're nowhere near usable, safe, secure, or anything I'd put in production.
Yet.
That's right. Yes.
I'm joking. But I have the same. Statement, but conclusion. Ronnie, did you see anything interesting into the building, the designing, the development, the deployment, the security of APIs with LLMs?
Oh, it's still experimental. I mean, for sure, we've seen examples of people playing with the code, like using helpers to write the code. Absolutely, but no, I haven't seen anyone do production grade. I designed the API by asking AI some questions, and then I just launched it directly. Not yet, but look, go anywhere, go on LinkedIn, you'll see stuff like Mike Kelly's doing, like using open banking, AI driven, and none of that's going to see light of day until everyone gets over the governance and regulatory fears, right? But showing it's possible is the first step, right? The other stuff will come. It will happen.
Yep. Agreed.
I just got distracted by the question too. Insects and animals. Are we answering that? Mehdi, you answer that.
Which question?
Somebody posted a question about insects and animals on our books. Why do we have this dog? Why our last API Academy book was a fish or something, or a snail?
If first we don't choose the animal. Right? Secondly, the animal is chosen according to the content of the book. So, for example, it's a shepherd on our side because we talk about the governance aspect, and we talk about alignment, and being sure that it stays aligned and stay coherent over time. The APIs aspect. But also, if I remember, Aurelie also tried to promote endangered species, especially. So this one is actually a dog shepherd. We say shepherd or shelter? No, dog.
Yes, shepherd. Either way, yeah.
Okay, shepherd, which is actually it's a Welsh dog, which is actually shorter on his feet than the other one that every shepherd is breeding. So it's an endangered species. So it seems that they mix the theme of the book with animals, and most of the time endangered species, to give them more visibility, at least on software books, and also because they also have this safari marketing and stuff. So at least from last time I talked to someone already about why a dog, why this dog, this is the answer I had.
Good enough for me. I like it. It's a good story.
Yeah, so that was the at least, but you can ask Aurelie directly about why they decided to do that. But I think what I said is at least 80% of the real answer.
Cool.
Perfect.
For an LLM, that's not too bad.
Yeah, we will see. Thank you very much, Mike. Thank you, Ronnie. A big thought for Erik for good recovery.
Yep.
And yes, we go for a 20-minute break and being back to the last segment of the day, but not the least.